All right, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's session of Truly Foundation and A Course in Miracles with your host, Oliver Blue. I am your temporary guide, teacher, guru, coach, whatever you want me to be. But today we're going to be looking at another workbook lesson out of A Course in Miracles. And we are actually on workbook lesson 311. Workbook lesson 311. And we are in the section as we make this final journey towards uh, the end of this project, which is 365 lessons. We're in this section of the workbook lessons on what is the last judgment. I did a commentary on this subject on yesterday. You can go to our YouTube channel at Truly Foundation and highly recommend you listen to that, because that lesson on what is the last judgment, which provides an explanation of God's final judgment as it is shared from the point of view of A Course in Miracles, which is, as you might know, and what you might come to understand, is it is a different perspective that is traditionally known. And so where the next 10 lessons will be short lessons to basically continue to validate its theological approach or idea about the subject of the last judgment. And basically what it said with the last judgment, there's two point of views. There's the last judgment based on man's point of view, and then there is what is called God's final judgment. And basically the last judgment, as man has laid it out, is based on the belief that separation actually occurred, that we were actually separate from God at some point. And now, as a result of that separation, in the final judgment, there's going to be a final judgment where God's going to separate the good and the bad, send the good off with him, and the bad goes to the torture chamber. That's basically it. I know that sounds raw, but that's kind of the gist of the idea. What the Course says, that's man's idea. That's man's false belief in an angry and an unloving God, where we made a unloving father out of God. But it talks about God's final judgment is the same judgment that God rendered when he created all creation, when he created humanity. He created humanity like himself. And would God judge himself unrighteous? Would God judge himself as separate and apart from himself? Would God render himself unfit? Would God have an opinion or a conclusion about himself that's not good? It's impossible. It's preposterous, according to what the Course says here. And if you just use basic logic, which approach would you choose? That God is love, and in God there's only light, there's only love, and that God creates after his own kind, and God is not only creates out his own kind, but God's going to be kind not only to himself but to his creation. Would you choose that, or do you choose, love in God, in life, in reality is not eternal, it's not infinite, it's weak, and it can be broken, and we did it. And for doing it, now God's gonna punish some of us for the rest of eternity. Which do you choose? Which sounds like reasonable? I mean, just if you explain that to two children, they would say that doesn't sound right. He's an angry God. He's a no. I don't want to know that God. Of course you wouldn't. But this is the preposterous story that we have passed down from generations to generations. But when you wake up to the truth of who you are, we come to understand that God is love, and what God created is love. And there's only love, and we're part of that love. And so wherever God is, whatever God does, wherever God ends up, that's where we're going to end up. And so today's lesson out of the workbook, lesson 311, says this: I judge all things as I would have them to be. So in the process of transformation and renewing our mind, this is our idea for today, that we will judge all things as we would have them to be. What is judgment? When we say judgment, what is judgment? Well, judgment basically is to form an opinion and a conclusion. To form an opinion and a conclusion about something. And so how can you make an accurate judgment unless you know everything? Unless we know everything. There's only one that knows all things. And that's the spirit of reality. That's the spirit of God. That is the infinite source of all life, knows all things about all things. So God is the only one that can really form an opinion or come to a conclusion about a matter. And so God is the creator of life. And that life that God created is his very own life, his very own self, his very own being. And so God concluded when he created or extended his very own self, that what he created and what he extended was very good. And that it was infinite and eternal and unalterable and unchangeable. And so in God's creation, God levied judgment at that time. That is very good. And it remains that way. And it's eternal. It's unchangeable. It's unalterable. It is reality. It is knowledge. It is truth. It is of the one law, the law of God and the law of love. It is timeless. It is birthless. It is beyond time and space. It has no opposite, no beginning and no end. It just is. I am that I am. So judgment was rendered in creation, and that was it. There's nothing else to judge. But here come humanity, taking on a false idea of separation and a false identity, and recreating God in their own image, and creating religions and traditions around that idea, and passing it down to all the generations based on what? Sin, consciousness, guilt, and fear. And even in that, humanity felt that because of the separation, that there had to be a judgment rendered. And so that's why the propensity for us to want to judge things, people, places, and things exists in the Son of Man, or the Son of Humanity. So that which we made that was not what God created, it became what? The propensity to judge all things, not having all knowledge, not having accurate knowledge or correct information. And so that's why Jesus said over in one of the Gospels, Jesus talked about judgment. And this is what he said about it. If I can find it, and I know I can. What did he say? Let me find that. Because he dealt with it in the most effective way. And that was in Matthew chapter 1. in Matthew chapter 1, Jesus of Nazareth, he dealt with the subject of judgment as he was teaching the people. He said, "Judge not, that you be not judged." So there's a principle there that if you judge, if you form an opinion or a conclusion about something, he said that opinion and that conclusion that you form will be used in the same manner to judge you. So make sure your judgment is accurate, is what he was saying. Because if it's not, that same judgment is going to be levied against you. So he said, "Judge not, that you be not judged." In other words, he said, don't even judge. Why? He said, because you don't have all the information. You don't know all of the circumstances. You don't know what all of the things that has gone into this situation or this person or this place or this thing. He says, so don't judge. He said, because if you judge, you're going to judge inaccurately. And that same judgment is going to be used against you. So he said, "Judge not, that you be not judged. For with what judgment you judge, what opinion or conclusions you make, he said, you shall be judged. And with what measure you meet, it shall be measured against you." When we judge from a place of separation, we're always going to be wrong. When we make a judgment about a person based on the belief that humanity is separate from its creator, we're going to be wrong. When we make a judgment or an opinion about a person in terms of their right standing or their future, where truth is concerned, and we do it from a place of separation, we're going to be wrong. And that same judgment is going to be levied against us. So he said, "Judge not." There's only one judge, and that judge has already judged, and he has judged all things as good. He has judged humanity in righteousness. God knows not of our belief in separation. God knows not of our making up a world and making up an individual self and all of the things that happen in this dream world, this world of perception. God only knows the one thing, the one reality, and that is himself and that which he extends, which is himself, and that is the only reality there is. And God has judged that what? Very good. And so the lesson says, "I judge all things as I would have them to be." How would you have them to be? I would have them to be according to what? The will of God, or the judgment of God, not the judgment of man. Not man's opinion, not man's conclusion based on an error, based on a false reality, based on an idea that man fell and separated from God. If that is the route that we take, we will always end up in a wrong judgment. Humanity has not fallen. In the sense that have not separated from God. Has humanity fallen asleep and dreamed of being separated from God? Absolutely. But humanity has not separated himself from God. It's impossible. It is absolutely impossible. That's why God guaranteed that what? That same man, that same woman, that same boy, that same girl that has fallen asleep and dreaming of separation, he said, eventually they will awaken to the truth that is true always. That's God's guarantee, that everyone will eventually wake up to the truth of who they are and realize that they were only dreaming, they were only hallucinating, they were only what? Operating in fantasy and vain imaginings. And that nothing has changed, that we remain as God created us. And so the lesson goes this way. It says, judgment was made to be a weapon used against the truth. See? In other words, when we judge, it said that we are using it as a weapon against the truth because our judgment is not complete. Our opinions and our conclusion are based on limited and inaccurate information. And so when we judge, we're using our judgment as a weapon against the truth. When we judge someone to be separate, or when we judge someone to be different, when we judge someone to be of a lesser state, of an inferior or superior state, we're using it as a weapon against the truth. God created all things as the one thing. God created all things to have equality. So when we judge based on what we know naturally, we're going to end up in error, and that same judgment is going to be used against us. In many cases, we wonder, why is this happening to me? Why am I thinking this way? Why is nothing going right? Why? Well, that's the same judgment being met back to you. The universe only knows one person. So when you're talking about another person, the universe thinks you're talking about yourself. So when we're judging another, the universe only knows one person. And so they think you're judging yourself. So you're leveraging that judgment back against yourself. When we hold a grievance against someone, we think we're holding a grievance to hurt them. No, you're hurting yourself. And we wonder why is this happening? Why can't nothing seems to go right for me? Well, take a look at how we're judging, or if we're even judging at all, who we holding grievances against, how we're seeing people as different and not as equal, how we're judging based on politics and race and gender and who people love and how they love, all the things that the natural man does to separate himself from each other. We've been advised here, do not judge, because it's a weapon used against yourself. It separates. Judgment separates. So out of the belief in separation came the idea of judgment, wrong judgment. It separates. That is its basis. It separates. And there's no separation in God. God is only one. There's only oneness in God. There's only oneness in reality. But when we fall asleep because of the belief of separation, in that dream of being asleep, everything is separated. Everything is divided. Look around you. That's why nothing seems to be connected. That's the way we made the world, from a place of separation, not a place of oneness. So he says, it separates what it is being used against and sets it off as if it were a thing apart. That's what judgment does. It sets things off. It sets things apart. It isolates things. That's why isolation is it's not a good thing to isolate yourself. You're not designed to isolate. You are designed to be a part of the whole, not some separate part off on a barren island. You were created for fellowship, not for isolation. And then as it separates and sets something apart as though it's a thing apart, and then it makes of it what we would have it be. It judges what it cannot understand. Notice now, what we don't understand, we judge it. When we don't understand a thing, our tendency is to judge it, is to form an opinion or conclusion about it, not having all the information. We judge it. It judges what it cannot understand because it cannot see totality, and therefore judges falsely. Until we have the mind of Christ, the mind of God, we don't have the understanding. We don't have the totality. We don't understand the will of God. And so we're always going to end up in error or end up falsely. Let us not use judgment today, but make a gift of it to him who has a different use for it. Who has a different use for judgment? God does. What's God used for judgment? All things remain as I created it. In other words, all things are holy. All things are acceptable. Let us not use it today, but make it a gift to God who has a different use for it. He will relieve us of the agony of all the judgments we have made against ourselves. See, you're judging yourself. God will relieve you of that when we decide to judge not, and reestablish peace of mind by giving us God's judgment of his son. And what is God's judgment of his son? This my son. This is my creation in whom I'm well pleased, in which nothing has changed. We remain as God created us, as the holy creation of God. All of us. All of us, no exception. All of us in totality. There is no partiality in God. There's no separation in God. There's no impartialness in God. Love must be total. Love must be complete. So, Father, we wait with open mind today to hear your judgment of the Son that you love, of the creation that you made, this creation, which is humanity. We do not know him, and we cannot judge. We do not know him, and we cannot judge until we know ourselves. And so, if then when we find out who we are, we really know what? There's nothing to judge. And so we let your love decide what your creation is, whom you created, as your son must be. And so the lesson for today is we will judge all things as we would have them to be. And we would have them to be as God say that they are. And God says that what? All things are the one thing. All things are holy. All things are acceptable. All things are perfect. And we leave the judgment up to the one that knows all things. So that's our lesson for today. 3:11. I judge all things as I would have them to be. I would have them to be according to the will of God. And I leave all the judgment right there. Thank you so much. Walk today in a judge-free space, a no judge zone. Hold no judgment against yourself or anyone else. There's nothing to judge. We remain as God created us. Holy, blameless, innocent, complete, eternal, infinite. Have a great day. We'll see you on tomorrow for Workbook Lesson 312. Bye-bye.